Hey there, bibliophiles and those raising bibliophiles. Today's book review is a wonderful series called Blackthorn Key. Each of the books, I'm going to sort of give you an overview. I do have some notes typed up about each of the books, and you're welcome to visit my website, which will be linked below in the video notes, and you can check out more details about each of the books if you are really interested in wanting to dive in a little bit deeper. I absolutely love Blackthorn Key. So this book's a little bit older. I originally came across this book when I was a sponsor for Battle of the Books. And Battle of the Books is typically like there's a middle school and there's an elementary version. The elementary version is different from middle school, but essentially there's 20 books on the list, and students compete against students from other schools about who knows the most about the books. Totally fun, and I really enjoyed my time doing that. But I will say things have evolved over time as literature has changed, and so I have stepped back from that role for a time. But I originally came across Blackthorn Key, and my son, who loves to read, was trying to find something new to read that he hadn't already read off the shelf or from the library, just something that he really enjoys. He loves fantasy, he likes mystery, he likes some history. So, this kind of has all of that. It's mystery, not so much fantasy, but you do have like this historical aspect. And so a lot of the books, some of the characters or the events that are taking place do have a historical foundation. So anyhow, Blackthorn Key is just so great, and I love the series. So I handed him this, and then he was like, "Mom, are there any more?" And I was like, "Oh, probably not. Maybe. I don't know." So last fall, I was looking it up, and like, sure enough, there's like 5 more books. There's 6 books in this whole series, and it's awesome. So I'm going to go through each of those. If you are looking for a good read, I do have a little caution with book number 4, so you definitely want to hang out for that. But if you're looking for an interesting read for your reader that's clean and fun, some parts might be a little bit dark. There is murder and stuff involved, but it's a really good mystery, and it's got really great themes. And so I'm going to talk about some of those, and I absolutely love them. So the story starts out with Christopher Rowe. He's an apothecary. He's taken from an orphanage. His master Master Benedict takes him in. And this story really focuses on the fact that like his master is killed, and so he's trying to figure out like what in the world just happened and what's going on. So that's kind of book 1. It introduces you to Christopher Rowe, his master. Another key character is Isaac. You'll see him in here. Lord Ashcombe is a key character who comes in, and then Tom, who's his best friend. So great story, sort of entering in there. And Christopher likes to, put stuff together that, explodes. And so you see a little bit of that in each of the books, which I think a lot of young boys especially can relate to or will certainly enjoy. And the story is told from first person point of view, from Christopher's point of view. So it's an intriguing narration for that. All right. Book number 2, Mark of the Plague. So this story, what I also love about this series is that it just really picks up and continues. It's almost like a year in the life of Christopher Rowe. So it's not like, years have passed. It's really just months and weeks that have passed in some of these books. So this picks up in August 1665. The whole series is going to end in April 1666. So this is about the plague that took place in London. And so it's really, really fascinating in the story. He's trying to figure out what's going on. They're trying to be helpful to people who are struggling from the plague. And so, like I said, it just really picks up where the other book left off, but now they're dealing with this deadly plague. They don't know what's going on. Christopher Rowe doesn't have a master, and so he's trying to run the apothecary shop, but there's only so much that he can do because he doesn't have a master. And that's a theme that you sort of continue throughout because he doesn't have a master. He does find out, though, from Isaac that his master left him some treasure in the shop. And so that sort of instigates some actions because they're trying to figure out like where it is, and some mysterious people come into the shop asking for things. That's weird. And while to uncover who has been in his shop while he was away at one point, he learns of this bird man who claims to be a prophet, knowing who the plague will strike next. But something about this man doesn't sit right with Christopher. So in all of his sleuthing, he uncovers a devious plot playing on the emotions and the financial difficulties of everyone in London at the time. And this puts the lives of himself and his friends in danger. And it ultimately is someone that he cares about that offers a great sacrifice that gives him and his friends an opportunity to escape. And so your reader is definitely going to love the adventure and the mystery and just that sacrificial friendship and care that's in there. It's a clean read. There isn't anything unsavory in there. There are portions that are a little dark, especially when dealing with the plague and the Birdman, who is seen as like this angel of death who's looming. There is some violence towards the children by some characters who, don't want the children to thwart their plans. There are mentions of medallions and amulets that are used to ward off spirits and plagues, but some of that falls into historical accuracy. So it's not out of the realm of that. And so each of the books also has like a historical note. And so that could be of interest to your reader and something they could get into more. All right, next we have The Assassin's Curse. This book ultimately takes our characters away and they end up in France. And basically, there is a plot against somebody in King Charles' house. And so he's really worried for his sister. And so he sends Christopher and his friends over to France to kind of make sure that she stays safe. And so he doesn't want anything to happen to her. And again, we pick up in November of 1765. So remember, the other one started in August. And so they have to protect the King of England's sister and her family in France because someone's trying to kill them in order to basically belong to the Knights Templar and get the treasure that belongs to them. So this is really cool because you have the historical aspect of the Knights Templar that your reader gets to learn about. Not feeling confident, Christopher, about his ability to stop whoever is trying to kill the royal family, he decides to take a new approach. He decides that, hey, maybe if I find this actual treasure and I find it first, right, that will solve all of our problems. And it's part of that instigates and leads a lot of the books and motivations that are happening in the story. This was actually, of the first three, this one was my favorite. Because there's a lot of historical treasures to be found in here with the context of the story and places in France. It leaves you with a lot of twists, and I was definitely left like I needed to have the next book. Now, the next book is called Call of the Wraith. And so, book number 4. So, full disclosure, I told you that there was one that I was like, And so this really depends on your reader. So I actually had my son skip this book because I understand his nature and his demeanor, and he's sort of sensitive to some things. And so I didn't want him to have just dark thoughts. So this book is definitely darker than the others. And in all honesty, you can really leave this book out and the story still makes sense and continue on. So there's nothing in this book aside from like one mention that shows up in another book that your reader absolutely needs to have. Picking up in December, they're on their trip to England from France, but they're shipwrecked along the southern coast of England. And the book opens with Christopher dreaming that he's trapped in ice and he's fighting to break free. Meanwhile, there's this black bird that's like mocking him to despair. And so Assassin's Curse ends with a note about the raven, and that's the first that you hear about him. And so there's this idea that that's sort of developing as an idea. As he's trying to dig out, and there's also children at some point who are trying to dig out of this ice, like their fingers are bloody. And so like, that's not a pretty picture. But he becomes awake, and then he's like, he has no memory. He has no idea who he is. And so that's a key part in this story. Just for this book, it doesn't really reappear anywhere else in this book. It doesn't have lasting effects. It's just sort of weird. Like I said, you can really take this book out of the series if you're questioning it at all, the way that I did. I mainly took it out just because it was dark. The villagers in this book, they believe that there's this white lady who's taking the souls of innocent children. There's several mentions to black magic and strange dark things happening that occur throughout the first half of the book. So there's like a lot of fear and mystery, but there's also like this speculation that Christopher might have been possessed by a demon, that the witch caused it, and that's why he doesn't have his memory. And so like I said, like depending on your student and your worldview of how you see things, like that was just not ideas that I wanted my son to have in his mind, like thinking about, because I know that would cause him trouble. He wouldn't be able to read that and kind of reason that out or move on. So meanwhile, Christopher doesn't believe all these stories, but there is something that is haunting that tempts him to believe. So he really struggles with this idea because he doesn't have his memories. He's not sure what's going on. And so he's confused, but willing to go along with sort of what's going on to figure out. He eventually is reintroduced to Sally and Tom, who are scared because, their friend has lost his memory. There's a young girl that sort of tags along with them throughout the story. They call her Moppet. The young girl, she doesn't speak, but she loves Tom. And so Tom swears to protect her and to discover what's harmed her as she refuses to speak to them. And she's really just very fearful throughout the story. Christopher and all in tow, they visit the local witch, Sybil, who tells Christopher it was a demon that caused the storm to break their ship and all these other things that are going on. She then goes on to speak a curse to him and tying his memories and spirits to the rescuing of these children, because in the meantime, children have been taken from the town. And so that's really going on. This leads him to discover and visit Sir Edmund, who's technically a local like witch finder and baronet. And then he learns about Hookredale, which is this like creepy place. Sands does do a great job of building up the fear and suspense in the first half of the book as the children, especially Christopher, because remember, it's first person, try to uncover what's taking place. This is primarily where the story is really dark, is the beginning, because you have this fear of witchcraft and demon possession and witches and all that kind of stuff. And but it does break. So when Christopher and his friends are snooping around at the haunted like Hook Riddle, where the white lady is said to have committed suicide and that she like frequently visits, something's not adding up to him, and like logic and reasoning are starting to take their rightful place in Christopher's mind. And he's actually even almost killed, and they're kind of trapped in there for a little bit. And it really is at this point that we see the atmosphere of the book like start to move and change as they try to figure out what really is going on, who's really trying to kill them, what's really going on with the children. And they basically discover that Sir Edmund and his son Julian are part of the plot, resulting in the disappearing children, who are being sold essentially to slaves of the Barbary pirates. Again, there's a historical note about that and their belief in witchcraft of the time and pirates of the 1600s, so that could be interesting for your reader. But again, these are children being sold into slavery, so that's kind of rough. And then Tom and Christopher fight these pirates, and they soon are rescued by Lord Ashcombe. He magically gets his note, and not really magically, but he shows up, and him and his army like decapitate some of the pirates. Again, I told you it was a little dark. And then you find out that Sir Edmund and Julian are found hanging from the tower of their home, a presumed suicide, which is the third mention of suicide in the book. I wasn't sure where this book was going to go when I started it, but it has good themes. So if you do choose to read it or have your child read it, there are good themes in there. I love the fact that Tom is very heroic, and he defends the girl Moppet, and they become very close. And so it's really, you see this idea of like, you're afraid, but you face your fears. You let logic and reason overcome those fears, that you don't let your emotions do that. And then this idea that Tom of defending the weak, and so those that are vulnerable. And so those are good themes, but overall, like a lot of the book was really dark, and a lot of the suicide, that was just not something that I wanted my son to read. Unfortunately, it didn't impact the book, the series, like reading through the whole series. All right, book number 5 is called The Traitor's Blade. And so this one is really good. We pick up again not too long after we've left. Like here we are shipwrecked on the coast of England, and here we finally make it all the way back to London. So Christopher, Tom, and Sally, they're not in London very long when Simon, who appeared in book 3, shows up at the doorstep of the apothecary shop, and he has a knife in his back. Fortunately, the wound's not deadly, but it's also not a minor one, and so he's like bedridden for the whole book, and that kind of continues into the next one. And then Christopher and Tom are called to the palace to meet with King Charles because guess what? King Charles still needs someone to save him because there's a new plot against his life. And that really takes up the bulk of the book. They're trying to figure out who is the traitor, and this blade that keeps popping up of the people who've been killed because other people have been killed at the palace. And so they're trying to figure that out. There's lots of puzzles that are reminiscent of the clues from the Templars in book 3. And unfortunately, something really sad happens at the end with our Templars. But I don't want to give too much away, but it was really good. Ultimately, Christopher and Tom are able to prevent the king from being murdered, but they are outnumbered. So there's like this huge battle scene. And it's a valiant show of bravery from Christopher and Tom as they're trying to defend the king. And Tom's one of my favorite characters. And this really leaves you with a lot of great ideas, not ideas, but like themes. One of them is Christopher gets a new master who's really a spy master. And so he's learning the tricks of the trade to like be a spy master, which kind of goes along with his apothecary guild. And in this, we have the idea that like, don't make things connect that don't connect. So it's this idea of like letting the clues really follow through. And so one of the guys, the apothecary master that he has this great quote. He says, "The human mind is so exceptional at recognizing patterns, so good in fact that when there are no patterns, we invent them to fill the gaps. Once a man's mind is fixed on what he believes is the truth, nothing else can be real. If he finds evidence that supports his theory, then he's correct. If he finds evidence that refutes his theory, does he rethink his beliefs? Very rarely. Instead, he dismisses the evidence or finds some way to twist it so that it will fit his view of the world. He simply refuses to see." And I just think that like really encapsulates a lot of this book, that quote. But what a good quote to talk about with your readers about the human mind and our ability to maybe not see truth and reason as it really is. All right, that leads us to book number 6. Okay, so The Raven's Revenge. The Raven is coming back, and he is going to get his final revenge on Christopher, which actually goes all the way back to Master Benedict in the story. And I just love this story, this book, for definitely like your tween readers. This picks up just weeks later, so it's only April. And we have this final showdown. The clues of the book all start to come together. The book actually opens with Christopher being arrested for committing a crime, which is the death of his neighbor. And it's the work of Lord Ashcombe that finally kind of finds him and relieves him. And then they're trying to figure out like what in the world is going on. And so they start with trying to figure out who killed his neighbor, which is probably a good place to start. And then from there, the story just continues to unfold, and you find that it all comes back to Master Benedict and an earlier apprentice that he had. And like I said, I'm actually not going to give too much away. There's a lot of action in this book. My son and I could not put it down. We read it all in like one day each. It was just that good. One thing I will share is that I love the focus on bravery and friendship throughout this entire series. Tom at one point willingly lays down his life for his friend, which, reminds me of that verse in John 15:3, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friend." And Tom is really a true friend in that regard and laying down his life for his friend. Don't worry, Tom doesn't actually die. But they don't all know that at the time. So that was a little hard read. But all the while in the books, I kind of had a hint of who I thought maybe was the Raven. But the depth of it goes way deeper than I could have imagined. And I think Kevin Sands does a wonderful job of presenting a book series for readers. Maybe you don't have an avid reader, but this might be a series that hooks them. It's fast-paced. There's lots of action. There is a little scene where Sally and Christopher kiss at the end of the book, so there's a little bit of budding romance in that regard. But I feel like the series overall wraps up with a very happy ending and kind of leaves you satisfied in the sense of where these characters are going to end up. So that's a lot. That was a whole book series, and hopefully you are interested in the Blackthorn Key. I certainly enjoyed it. My son has enjoyed it. My son's friends have enjoyed it. And if you need a good book for your tween reader and you want a good series, I would definitely check out The Blackthorn Key by Kevin